Well, I'll tell you, I'm running for Congress. My campaign slogan is "Stop all wars and bring back the Constitution." And I'm not just talking about the wars in Afghanistan and all the other interventionism that we're involved in around the globe. I'm talking about the wars our government wages on the American people, the war on the American taxpayer, the war on entrepreneurs, the war on drugs, the war on alternative lifestyles, all these wars that we're fighting. And the reason I'm running is because I realized in my older years that the country's been at war my entire life. And it's been at war the entire life of my children. And it probably will be at war the entire life of my grandchildren, which really scares me, unless we do something to stop the wars. And I'm talking about bringing back the Constitution because I believe that the Congress in particular has been derelict in its duty to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. The idea that our founders had was to establish a government with limited and specific powers, and we've gone way beyond that to the point where the government legislates everything. Basically, the concept of libertarianism, we believe that you own yourself, that you are a better person to decide what's good for yourself and your family than anybody else, particularly the government. So if you believe that you should be able to do certain things, then you're probably a libertarian. If you believe that you should be able to spend your money the way you see fit, you're probably a libertarian. If you believe that you should be able to use your property the way you see fit, you're probably a libertarian. Some people look at it from the standpoint of if you are fiscally conservative, then you're a libertarian. If you are socially tolerant, then you're probably a libertarian. We combine both of those into one philosophy. Well, we're hoping that people, when they find out about the libertarian candidate, will consider us as an alternative to what many people consider one big party. We say we have a Democratic and Republican Party, but I, for one, think there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two major parties on most issues. For example, a lot of discussion about the Affordable Health Care Act, referred to as Obamacare. Now, and that's a Democratic issue. The Republicans under Mitt Romney, they're talking about replacing affordable health care with something else. So they're really not arguing about the basic issue of whether it is within the authority of the federal government to have anything to do at all with health care, which is what the libertarians will bring. So we're hoping that if people look at, one way of looking at it is Tweedledum and Tweedledummer, I refer to it, that we have two candidates in the major parties that basically argue over the nuances of how to do something, whereas the libertarians will come up and say, well, maybe the government ought not to do that. So we're hoping that we bring a real alternative. There's a lot of dissatisfaction, I find, with both Democrats and Republicans about the course of our country, and they're dissatisfied with their own parties. And the beauty of being a libertarian is I can reach out to both Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives on certain issues, find common ground and say, well, maybe you ought to vote your principles this time and vote for a candidate that you really believe in rather than voting for your own party candidate. Well, I believe that again, both of the Democratic and Republican parties are of the same ilk, that they basically believe in government solutions to all problems. As a libertarian, I believe exactly the opposite. I have really been, the real reason I'm running, as I said earlier, is that I want to stop the wars. I am an Air Force veteran. I'm proud of my 25 years in the service. But I am tired of our country being at war. And I get really upset and angry whenever I see a young soldier coming home with his limbs blown off or his mind destroyed, or what really bothers me when I see a soldier seeing his child for the first time in 6 months or a year because he's been deployed. There is no reason for this. And neither the Democratic or Republican candidates in this particular congressional race have come out against the wars. So that's why I think there's a difference. And that is, our country's $16 trillion in debt. We're borrowing money. We're spending money we don't have. Is absolutely unconscionable that Congress does not take action. And all Congress does is pass the buck to the president or to some unelected bureaucrats, and that is not what they're supposed to do. Well, the first issue would be to stop funding the wars. Now, I will be one member and 434 other people. I think my first job in Washington would be to find like-minded representatives in both parties that think like I do on this particular issue, so we can actually get some legislation done. But that would be the first effort I would do. And I think they do exist. I don't think that everybody, I think Congress as a body has been derelict in duty to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. But I think that there are honest congressmen, and hopefully a new crop will be elected in this time around where I can find common ground. By party, there are none. Ron Paul has been in Congress quite some time as a Republican, but he is essentially a libertarian in his philosophy. The thing about libertarianism, it's more of a philosophy. The worst thing about libertarians is that we don't believe in government, so running for office is kind of a strange thing. Our heart's really not in it. But I run for office in self-defense. If you really want a candidate that you truly believe in, you run for office yourself. But Ron Paul is one. I can't. There are guys like Dennis Kucinich, who is a Democrat and a liberal, quote unquote, but I could find common ground with him on many issues. The drug war, for instance. We got more people in prison than any other nation in the world, and mostly they're people of color, simply for doing something to their own bodies that somebody disagrees with. Well, that's an interesting question, because I think people think they know what the Republican Party stands for, and they think they know what the Democratic Party stands for, but in actuality they don't, because they all stand for the same thing. There are people that will vote for a Democratic candidate because they've always voted Democratic, and on the same thing with Republicans. So the biggest issue that libertarian candidates have is to identify ourselves, to explain to people what libertarianism means, what we actually stand for. Theoretically, on November 6th, all three of us have exactly the same chance of being elected. I'm not delusional, though. I do understand that, again, most people will vote for the two quote-unquote major parties. And I've been to a few events during this. I don't have a lot of money. I'm not raising a lot of money. I'm not raising any money, actually. I'm doing some small advertising, so getting my name out there. But I've already run into a couple of public meetings where I've met people that, oh yeah, I know you. You're the libertarian, and so we're making inroads. I think the Ron Paul movement has done a great deal to identify to people what libertarians stand for, and so that it's an uphill battle. But the one thing I have is, you're a poli-sci major, a history major. Anybody who understands American history and American political science, we've always had insurgent parties that have risen up and with ideas that countered what the major parties were proposing, and eventually they came to the front and they became a major party. That's how the Republican Party started, and that's how the present Democratic Party started. They started out as third parties. So someday there'll be a shift, and the libertarian ideas will be restored. Well, I am raising small amounts of money. Under the Federal Election Commission rules, if I raise more than $5,000, I have to fill out a multi-page report. So I'm deliberately not avoiding that. So I'm spending less than $5,000 to do this, to run this race, which is why I rely on, I jump at any chance to speak to anybody about the issues. And that's the way, I think that's what our founding fathers intended to have, particularly in the House of Representatives. It's supposed to be the people's house. It's supposed to be the place where you could reach out and touch your representative to the national government. And unfortunately, we've forgotten that particular idea. So I'm doing what I can. You folks are the future of our country. And you know, you hear every old person tell you that, but I really believe that. I remember when I was a teenager, and I didn't go to college, I joined the Air Force. Well, you know, the college vote is important because you guys are the future of our country. And the things that are happening now, I mentioned earlier, with $16 trillion in debt. Every child born today comes born with, you know, you wonder why when the doctor gives birth, let me rephrase that. When the doctor holds the baby for the first time and slaps him on the bottom and the baby screams, you know why the baby screams? Because the baby knows he already owes $50,000 in debt. It's a joke. I'm not very good at joke. You know, this money that the government's spending that we don't have, somebody at some point is going to have to pay it back, and it's not going to be me. It's going to be you guys and maybe your children and your grandchildren. We got to stop it. I also want to stop the wars so that we don't have to send young people overseas to fight in interventionist wars. Yes, we need a strong national defense. If this country is attacked, we should be able to take care of business, defeat the enemy, but then bring our troops home. There is absolutely no reason why we should have bases in more than 900 bases in nearly 200 countries. Absolutely no reason for it. Well, actually, I've always been interested in politics. When I remember watching the 1960 Democratic National Convention with my father, who was a staunch Democrat. And this 60 convention was John Kennedy. You know, he won the nominations of Democrats. I was not a Democrat. I considered myself a Republican. I don't know why. Probably because my father was a Democrat, so I had to be a contrarian, and I was a Republican. But I was interested in politics when I was a kid. I joined the Air Force out of high school, and of course that kind of stymied my military career. Kind of stymied any idea of getting involved in politics. So I've always been that, and I'm one of those people that has always had this idea of you know, individual responsibility, you know, individual liberty, individual responsibility. I was a big fan of Barry Goldwater, who was considered to be a conservative Republican, but I come to find out in my later years that he actually had a lot of libertarian ideas. So that's just something I've always done.